So what is the Know Your Rights Camp Autopsy Initiative? Nicole, you oversee that project. Can you just refresh my memory?
Of course. So the Know Your Rights Camp Autopsy Initiative is an initiative founded by Nessa and Colin Kaepernick, where we provide free second autopsies during in-custody death cases. And we have our own team of independent board-certified pathologists who perform the second autopsies for families. So we have 3 services that we provide. The first is an independent second autopsy. The second is a disclosure of the preliminary findings. And the third is the issuance of a final second autopsy report.
And you oversee this project. Give everyone a refresher on who you are.
Oh, thank you. Yes. So my name is Nicole. I'm an attorney, and I am the legal program director of our Know Your Rights Camp Autopsy Initiative. And our Autopsy Initiative has a team of 3, where Griselda Garcia is our program manager and Kiana Wilgis is our operations manager.
So remind everybody why a second autopsy is often necessary.
So there was a lot of reasons why we decided to start the Autopsy Initiative. One of those first being the high cost of obtaining a private autopsy. On average, each autopsy can cost about $13,600, including transportation.
Wow.
So Colin wanted to alleviate the financial burden of families having to pay this, especially during a time of grief. And so we wanted to be able to provide that financial assistance first. The next issue that we realized was the lack of objectivity and transparency that can occur within the autopsy process. And so that's why we wanted to create our own independent team of pathologists who are performing the second autopsies. So typically when a death occurs, the first autopsy is going to be conducted by the state or county medical examiner or coroner's office. So our pathologists are performing these autopsies independent of a government entity.
Got it. And I think it's very important to emphasize that sometimes, unfortunately, or most of the time, we need this outside source. We need this sort of outside help. How have you seen this impact families?
In several ways. A lot of families have told us how difficult it is for them to get answers about how their loved one died, especially when it's an in-custody death. And so we have a very broad definition of what includes our in-custody deaths. So in-custody deaths for the purposes of our initiative include deaths that occur during arrest, apprehension, pursuit, and during incarceration. And what we've seen in these type of deaths, the families often are giving less access to information. And so oftentimes when there is an in-custody death, it can take the family between 6 to 8 months to be able to receive information about how their loved one died. And that's just an extremely long waiting period because a lot of families have told us that they can't even begin their grieving process until they know what happened to their loved one. So that's why I wanted to be able to provide immediate support. And so what we do differently is that within 3 weeks after one of our pathologists performs a second autopsy, we will allow the family member and their attorney, if they have one, to speak directly with the pathologist, and that is our disclosure of the preliminary findings. So at that stage, the pathologist still doesn't have all of the information. They still don't have the first autopsy report, medical records, jail records, photos, eyewitness reports, body cam footage. So they can't definitively say what the cause of death is at that time, but they can still be able to speak to their observations during the second autopsy. And we found that that call has been extremely helpful for families because it gives them the opportunity to be able to speak to someone directly, and they feel like they can trust us and our staff and our team and our pathologists as well too. So I think it's also important to provide that system of trust as well too, knowing that our pathologists are all board certified forensic experts and that they're able to do the autopsy objectively. So I think as far as the impact on families, it's them feeling more confident in knowing what happened to their loved one and also giving them the confidence that someone cares about what happened to their loved one. A lot of families feel very neglected during that time. Not only did they lose their loved one in a tragic way, they feel like they can't get the answers or clarity that they need to be even able to process what's going on. So I think it's very important for us to be able to provide that support for them. So I think that families have told us that our initiative has given them hope. It's given them light. It's given them information that they need. They need to be able to understand what happened to their loved one so they can at least begin processing what occurred and then hopefully be able to obtain justice after that as well too. I think that in these type of cases, families will never fully receive justice because nothing can be done to bring their loved one back.
Right.
And there's nothing that's more important than that to families. But there should be some type of accountability or some type of compensation that can be provided to families who have experienced this type of tragic loss.
Right. And I think what's unfortunate and what you're talking about is when people think about in custody deaths, they're looking directly at that action, that tragedy, but the aftermath and how it affects everyone else. This is a way for families to sort of take agency for themselves, right?
Right.
But it's also nice to know that the initiative is not just the autopsy, not just information. It's helping, if there is such a thing as closure in these cases, it's helping just be supportive.
Yes.
And I think that's just something that unfortunately the system lacks. How many of these autopsies have been done?
Yes, so we launched our program in 2022, and since then we have provided 115 free second autopsies for families.
What have you seen, just looking at those first 100 plus cases?
We've definitely seen a lot of issues that have occurred within the autopsy process itself. We've seen differences in opinion. We've seen procedures that should have been done that weren't done. So, for example, one of our pathologists has used the example of someone dying due to a neck injury. And the first pathologist, if they didn't do any type of analysis on the neck, then how can you be giving an accurate cause of death diagnosis?
Right.
So we've seen that when we're talking about discrepancies and what we've seen in differences between the first and second autopsies, there's several layers to what issues can exist. The first can be, differences in reports and opinion. The second can be differing in procedures that were or were not performed. And then we've also seen just complete falsehoods, like facts that just are not true or things that didn't occur. And so we've seen a variety of all of those. I would say we have seen cases where the first autopsy report ruled the cause of death as a natural cause, and then our pathologist performing the second autopsy found that it was not a natural cause, it was a homicide, and someone was strangled and beaten to death. So those are some of the examples of the difference in reports. We've also seen at least 3 times where a family was told that a second autopsy was performed. Our pathologist went in to do the second autopsy and realized that no first autopsy was performed at all. So that's just completely lying to the family. So that's kind of where I'm talking about a falsehood, something that just didn't occur. And then the first example is more about procedures that should have been done to be able to get an accurate cause of death diagnosis, but didn't occur. So there's several layers of issues that we have seen within these procedures. And we've seen a lot of errors that have been made.
I see. Do you and your team sort of not oversee, but are you with the families as this is happening?
Yes, our program manager, Griselda, is with the families every step of the program. So Griselda handles all of our intake and the services completion. And then Kiana handles all of our transportation coordination and the logistics on the pathologist side. And so it's critical for us to maintain strong communication with our families. And so that's our top priority, is making sure that the families feel that they're getting the information that they need and support from us as well too. So while this is going on, we know that families are coming to us in one of the most difficult times in their life. And knowing that, we take that very seriously as far as being prompt in communication and being able to provide additional support and resources when we can. So it's very critical for us to be able to be with the family through this process. And we think that's something that also distinguishes our program, is that we do genuinely care for all of the families that we are serving.
How does that impact you and your team? I know that you probably spend a lot of time focusing on the families, but let's talk about the team as well. How does that impact you?
Yeah, so it definitely is a difficult line of work. I would say anyone who's dealing with social justice, you as well, just being in this field, it's not easy work, but it's needed. And I would say what keeps us going is knowing that the families need us. They need our support. Seeing all of the issues that we've seen within the process, that keeps us going to know that, yes, what we're doing is difficult, but if we don't do it, who is going to do it? And I think that's one of the challenges, is that we are a very new program still, but there's no other program in the world doing what we're doing, providing these free second autopsies and also being able to be that support for the families during this time. So I think that it is very challenging. It is very heavy topics, especially talking about death in general, but also when it's death in tragic ways and in these in custody death settings, it's very difficult. So one thing that I do tell our team is that it's important for us to take mental breaks and making sure that we have the capacity to be able to give the families the support that they need. So sometimes that can be 5 minutes, sometimes it can be 10 minutes, but we are very busy. So it's just making sure that we're doing what we can because the families deserve our best. And so that is always a top priority for us. So I think it's being mindful, it's being intentional, it's knowing when we need to show up and knowing when you need to take a step back. When we first started the program, I was the first employee of the Know Your Rights Camp initiative. I started the initiative with Colin and Nessa. And so when it was just myself, it was very, very difficult because I was the point of contact for everything. I was the point of contact for the families, the point of contact for the pathologists, the point of contact for the attorneys. And so it was a lot of communications and it was a lot of cases that we were dealing with at once. And so oftentimes I didn't really have the luxury of having really time to be able to reflect or process because there was a lot going on. And so that's why I think the team has been so helpful and so transformative because we're now in a space where we do have more capacity to be able to communicate with one another, check in to see how everyone's feeling, see how the family's doing. And so we can really support each other as a team as well too. And so I think that Colin and Nessa, they also know how difficult our work is as well too. And so they've always made themselves available for any issues or concerns that arise as well too. And our whole team, our whole Know Your Rights Camp team, I would say has been very supportive of what we're doing. And I think that's what makes working at Know Your Rights Camp so unique is because we do really have an amazing team where we can all lean on each other and collaborate and get new ideas and have innovative ways of thinking about how we can make our services better and how we can serve our families the most. So I would say that the work that we do at Know Your Rights Camp overall isn't easy. It's us doing what's difficult, but it's also us doing what's not being done because we know it's needed.
Right, it's stepping up. And I think I want to thank you because I think when people first hear about the Autopsy Initiative, the word autopsy scares people. It feels very technical. It feels very cold.
Yes.
But I think you're talking about this human side of it. And what do you, if you were to say like, no, there's a human side to it. Let me explain. Like, how would you describe that?
I think the human side is always trying to put yourself in their position. I think when we're trying to understand what's really going on with someone or what they're going through, of course, there's still going to be a disconnect because no one can really experience it unless they've gone through it, I think, with anything. But I think that if we take a step back and imagine, what if this was my dad, my son, my best friend, my nephew, my niece? I would say that what I've realized from working with the families is that a lot of the times when there has been an issue or a discrepancy, the family member had a gut feeling. They had an intuition. They had something, a feeling that was so strong that they knew that something wasn't right.
They just sort of knew that this couldn't be it.
Yes. And so I think when I think of how I can relate, I think a lot of times we're in these situations with our own families where something just feels off and we know that something is wrong. So I think it's kind of that feeling, but amplified more because, of course, your loved one is at stake. And I think it's also just understanding that everyone has everyone has someone that they love and care for. And so to lose them suddenly makes it even more difficult, I would say. So I think the human side is understanding how difficult it is to lose anyone close to us, and then to lose them suddenly, and then to not even have information. I don't see how someone couldn't empathize with how difficult that must be. And so families have told us that we have been able to be a trusted source for them. Because a lot of times in these states, they don't know who to trust. Sure. They don't know who they can go to. And so that's why Know Your Rights Camp has done so much emphasis and time on building ourselves up as a trusted organization where we have people's best interests in mind.
And we're seeing a lot of people getting detained. And unfortunately, we're hearing about in custody deaths. And so my understanding is the Autopsy Initiative is expanding, not necessarily expanding, but rising to meet the moment. Can you tell us a little bit about that?
Yes. So as we mentioned, our in-custody deaths include deaths that occur during incarceration. So that would also include deaths that occurred during ICE detention. And so when we think about families who have been losing their loved ones due to ICE detention while they're in an ICE facility, that still is applicable to what our services do. And that is still an in-custody death that we want to be able to assist families with. And we know that during ICE detentions, when someone loses their loved one in that way, there's oftentimes a lack of oversight of that detention facility. There's often a lack of communication between the facility and the families. And so that's why we understand how important it is for families who have lost their loved ones in ICE detention facilities to be able to utilize our services too. And as you said, we've seen a rise of these deaths occurring. And so we want to be able to, again, provide that support because every individual who has lost their loved one in an in-custody death manner should be able to obtain these rights as well too. So there is no distinction as far as what type of in-custody death there has to be. As long as it is in custody, we will be able to assist and help.
Got it. And I have to say, we've spoken about it in other podcasts, but I do a lot of work regarding ICE raids. What's harder here, I imagine, is that there's no communication whatsoever, where there may have been a lack of communication in other places. Here, you said no oversight, no nothing. Have you encountered that so far? Because this isn't something you're already launching. This has already been happening, right?
Right. Yes. So we have done one case that has occurred within an ICE detention facility, and there was an attorney on the case. I think that's also another layer that allows the family to be able to have more efficient results, I would say, because about half of our cases have an attorney and about half of our families do not have an attorney. I do think specifically knowing how difficult it is to get information from the ICE facilities, I think that having attorneys who can take on these cases will be able to reach out to us sooner. We still, of course, want I want to clarify that families do not need to have an attorney to utilize our services. But for attorneys who are watching this, who do handle these types of cases, we want them to reach out to us as soon as possible because we have seen a difference in obtaining records, obtaining information when an attorney is present, being able to advocate for them. Because through our initiative, we focus on autopsy services. We do not provide legal services. However, if a family member is interested in obtaining legal representation, we do have a list of attorneys that they can reach out to see if an attorney would be able to take on their case or at least do a consultation for them. And this list was compiled through assistance with the NAACP Legal Defense Fund and the National Police Accountability Projects. So we're always looking to partner with other attorneys who handle these type of cases because it is difficult and there are a lot of challenges and barriers in the notification process. And I think one really difficult issue occurring within ICE detention facilities is that people don't even know what facility they're taken to.
Right.
So that makes it more challenging. And another layer of if we don't know where our loved one is, then how can we be notified properly when a death occurs? So I think that there are going to be some challenges as far as what these ICE detentions will bring in obtaining these second autopsies. But that's why it's so important that we're having these conversations so people know to reach out to us, because we need people to reach out to us as soon as possible. And so I definitely would like to hear a little bit more about your experiences from families or that you've worked with and what their process has been in the notification process, or like what does that usually look like?
Honestly, there is almost no notification process. And that's what makes it difficult, I imagine, is that when someone gets detained, they don't know what facility they're getting sent to. Families don't even know sometimes that someone's been taken.
Right.
And so I can see how if there was to be, first of all, sometimes people don't even know that their family member is in custody. And then their death is the second piece of news that they're hearing, is that they were detained and then that they died. or, close to death. And so I really have to say that it seems like the Autopsy Initiative is just sort of, closing the gap in terms of resources that should be available that are not.
Yeah.
And so the fact that this initiative is going to look at folks who have died in ICE detention is a huge deal. And I hope that people listening, because the big thing when it comes to ICE is people don't know the resources. So I hope people know that the Autopsy Initiative is definitely a resource in this case as well.
Yes, no, I appreciate you emphasizing that. We definitely, we hope no one listening is in this situation where they need to utilize our services. Ultimately, people have asked us, what is the goal of the Autopsy Initiative, the end goal? We wish we didn't need this initiative to exist. But unfortunately, we know that in custody deaths are not only occurring, they're increasing. And especially mentioning now the deaths that are going to be continuing to occur at a much higher rate during ICE detentions, we want to make sure that families know that they can utilize us and that we are going to do everything that we can to be able to get them answers about how their loved one died. Because especially there's even going to be more in question about what actually occurred because there's that lack of oversight, that lack of communication where it's even more difficult to be able to get information and answers. And so we want families to be able to come to us so we can provide them with those answers of what happened to their loved ones, because that's what the families deserve at a bare minimum, is to know how their loved one died.
Right. And, the thought just occurred to me is that we're seeing at this exact moment in time is that local police, as far as that's concerned, are already not respecting people's rights. And so that's how we sort of lead to these in custody deaths. Well, as concerns ICE, federal police are definitely not concerned with anybody's rights. And so I'm glad, again, that you guys are closing that gap in terms of resources. But how do we attain those resources? If somebody is watching, if someone's like, hey, I think my family, somebody in my community, or if they're an attorney, like, hey, my client needs this, how do they get in contact?
Yes, so we have an autopsy request form that is located on our Know Your Rights Camp website. And so within the autopsy request form, anyone can complete that form on behalf of the decedent. So that can be a family member, that can be their attorney, that can be a close friend, that could be a community organizer. And what we're getting is information about what they know at that time of the death. So we're going to get the person's information who passed, the person filling out the form, their information as well, their contact information, the description of what they know about the death at that time, where the death occurred, what city, what state, the date of death. So we're trying to compile information there. Once we obtain that information, it then gets sent to Griselda, our program manager. She will then be able to review the form and be able to decide whether the death is an in custody death for the purposes of our program and services. If the death is an in custody death, then we will be sending an additional pre-screening questionnaire, and that asks for more detailed information about the decedent, how they died, any past conditions that they should know about, any information that would be helpful for the pathologist to know when determining what the cause of death diagnosis would be. Then once we have more information from the pre-screening questionnaire, our pathologist will then review that, and then they'll be able to decide whether performing a second autopsy would provide a reasonable likelihood of making an official cause of death diagnosis. And typically what they're going to be looking at in that factor is the way that the death occurred, from what they know at the time. The timing of the death is very important as well too. I want to emphasize that we are only providing second autopsies for recent death cases. So we cannot perform an autopsy if someone has been buried, embalmed, or cremated.
Right.
So that timing of death is very, very important. And that's why we need people to know, not only know that we exist, but to know to reach out to us as soon as possible, because we have limitations on when a second autopsy is still effective to be performed based off of how long has passed since they've died. And so that's an important criteria determination to make. Essentially then, if that is approved then by our pathologist coordinator, then we're able to accept the case. Essentially then, we will be sending out an acceptance letter detailing what will be the next steps, what the process will be. And then there's an additional an additional acceptance criteria, which kind of has to do with a condition check. And so Kiana, as I mentioned, she handles our transportation coordination and logistics. And so because we have our own independent team of pathologists, if someone's death occurred in a state where one of the pathologists is not licensed, then we will also cover the cost of transportation to send them to the state where the pathologist is licensed, have the autopsy performed, and then send them back. And so in order to be able to safely transport someone out of state, there are certain conditions and criteria that have to be met. So essentially then we'll have to do a condition check with the funeral home and get approval there. And so once that process has occurred and we've gotten all the approvals that we need, then we'll be able to coordinate the facilitation of the autopsy and then be able to send their loved one back into the family-selected funeral home's care.
I see. I mean, we've talked about how this has impacted families. We've talked about how it's impacted the team. Have people heard about this without hearing about this? I understand some of the cases that the Autopsy Initiative has taken on has actually been in the news, but people may not have realized it.
Yes. We definitely have had cases that have been high profile. However, I want to emphasize that just because a case is not necessarily in the news, it doesn't mean that there's any less significance. It just might have meant that the family was able to obtain certain resources to be able to assist them in being able to obtain some form of justice. But I do appreciate you bringing that up as well, because we have seen families who have obtained $4 million settlements through our autopsy services. LaShawn Thompson was one of those families, and during his case, he died due to severe neglect while he was incarcerated. That was due to bed bugs, malnutrition. So it was just a very awful incidence of the facility not taking proper care of people who are incarcerated there. And so that actually led to a Department of Justice investigation of Fulton County Jail where that occurred. And so when we see those type of investigations, that's something that we hope can happen more frequently. When you have facilities and prisons and jails that are consistently having people die within their care, there should be investigations.
Right.
There should be something being done. And so those are the type of changes that we would like to see occur from the results that we're seeing, because it's unacceptable for even one person to be able to die while they're in the care of the facility themselves. And then on top of that, for it to be occurring repeatedly and to such severe extents, there's just no words for that. Another case that led to a $4 million settlement was Rob Adams, and he was shot in the back. So it was a police shooting case that occurred in San Bernardino. And so those are cases that have been in the news that we've seen, but there have been a lot of other cases through our program where litigation is still currently pending. Most recently, we currently have a case where a wrongful death was filed. And as the attorney was making the filing, one issue was that the first autopsy report didn't reveal critical evidence, such as the histology or the autopsy photos, which are needed to make a definitive cause of death diagnosis. So when we talked earlier about some of the discrepancies, these are huge issues of even being able to file a claim, but not even able to have the right information that's needed. And so we have seen these cases that do lead to settlements, and we hope that all of the families through our program would be able to obtain some type of justice. But again, I mentioned there is no true justice in these type of scenarios, but the families deserve more. So we hope that attorneys who are regularly taking on these type of cases do utilize our services, so they're able to better advocate for families to be able to obtain some type of justice.
Right. And, we talk about it all the time when you talk about your rights, is that there's ways to expand your rights. And the most basic way to do that is to assert your rights. This is sort of a big tool allowing families to assert the rights of their loved ones after death. And it's not just for the families. There's a bigger impact, not just in asserting rights, but these set precedents, right? You're a lawyer. Anytime this goes to litigation, anytime a family wins because they were able to use evidence that wasn't there before via second autopsy, anytime they were able to uncover that something went wrong in the process the first time. Anytime someone sees that there's an issue within the carceral system, it creates this sort of notice to everybody that, hey, you thought that you could hide within the system, but now there are tools like the Autopsy Initiative that are there at the disposal of attorneys and families to get the justice, to assert the rights that they need to. And so it sets a precedent. And I just have to thank you and, the whole Know Your Rights Camp team for the work they do in realizing that there needed to be a resource there for people.
Well, thank you. I appreciate you always supporting the initiative since the very first moment that you heard about it. I appreciate you taking the time to facilitate the conversation, to spread awareness, because that's one of the main things that anyone watching this right now, when we think of what can we do going forward, it's talk about this. Talk about this with your friends, with your family, in your communities, because what's common amongst the families that we serve is that we know that these in-custody deaths are occurring, but no one is ever expecting or planning for it to be their family member.
Right.
So of course, again, we hope that no one watching this needs our services, but there might be someone that they know down the line who does. And so the more that people know about our services, the more people we can help. And that's truly what our goal is that we hope to be so well known that anytime there's an in-custody death, people are automatically thinking, let me reach out to the Autopsy Initiative. Because our sole purpose is to be able to help more families and help all families who have experienced this type of tragic loss.
Thanks again, Nicole, for giving us all the updates on the Autopsy Initiative, for letting us see the human side, and for reminding us that it's a big resource and that I hope it is a resource that people start to use. If you do need that resource, please go to knowyourrightscamp.org for more information. You'll see a whole section on the Autopsy Initiative.